What's up, YouTube? Whenever I'm out in the field practicing landscape photography, one of the main goals that I have is to create a real connection with the viewer and the final photograph that I present to them. I want, and this might be cliche, I understand that, but I want the viewer to be transported to the scene. I want them to be able to imagine themselves within the scene that I'm showing them. I want them to see themselves in those mountains or walking that trail in the woodland. I want them to be able to hear the water of the waterfall or the creek. I want them to have a real connection to it, whatever it might be for them. Now, there are some ways that I go about this that I try to imbue into every photograph. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that every photo that I take has this. Sometimes I just see something that looks cool and I snap it and I worry about what I'm going to do with it later. But for the most part, there are things that I'm looking for. And we're going to go over those real quick in some photographs that I'm going to show you. But what those are is interesting light, depth. I want to see some tension within the photograph, within the composition that I'm looking at. I also want to try to simplify the scene. There's a number of reasons that I want to try to do that. And there's one last thing that I'm looking for that I will explain at the end of the video. But for the most part, all those elements sort of play with each other. They can sort of work together to create all the things that I'm looking for, right? You can have interesting light that creates depth and tension and also simplifies, right? Interesting light in the background, midground, or foreground that creates some tension with the shadows within the opposing areas of the photo, right? You can create tension and simplification with color. Minimizing the colors in the photograph to maybe 2, 3 at most. You can create interesting light, depth, tension, and simplify with textures, right? Sort of how you compose it, how you want to show different textures. There are many ways, but those are the elements that I'm looking for when creating interesting photographs. And we're going to look at some examples, and I'm going to talk through how those elements come together in those photographs. Okay, so this photo here has all of the elements that I'm looking for when out in the field to create a photo that I think is really great. There is a lot of interesting light spilling down from the top in the background, and that is creating a lot of tension, a lot of depth with the foreground. The foreground is mostly shrouded within shadows. You have the path right here that is dimly lit, and then the light really brings you to that background. The midpoints starting to get some speckled light on there. And that's just creating, like I said, a lot of depth, a lot of dynamic elements. It also simplifies what would otherwise be a very chaotic scene. And that simplification of light to dark, light to shadow, combined with it having one really strong color throughout, and that is a green, even with the light on a foggy day, being tinted with that sort of green that is reflecting off of all of the leaves after an evening rain. It really simplifies what would otherwise be a really busy scene and a hard scene to sort of digest. It has all of the elements that I'm looking for whenever I'm out shooting. And this was created purposely. I know this area. I frequent this area. It's one of the locations that I've been to the most since practicing landscape photography and hiking. I know what it's like in all of the seasons, and I'm familiar with the weather there, and I know what it's like after an evening of rain. So this photo, wow, I got lucky to capture it in the way that I did. I also planned for this. I had an idea in my mind. I was very inspired by a particular thing, which I'll explain later in the video when I mentioned the last element that I look for. But I was very inspired by a particular thing. I had it on my mind, and it just so happened that I came across a scene in an area that I'm familiar with that allow me to recreate what was inspiring me in the moment. So yeah, this is a photo, like I said, you have that light in the background kind of spilling over, very soft. You have the depth that it creates with those foreground shadows. You have the light kind of speckling in the midground. One strong dominant color. It's an easily digestible scene that, wouldn't otherwise seem that way. So yeah, on to the next. Okay, so on to the next photo titled The Hollow. This has, again, all of the elements that I'm looking for when creating a photograph that I really enjoy. And kind of like the other one, this is another moody woodland scene that was captured early in the morning during blue hour after a night of rain. And again, this is another location that I've been to a lot. Probably, I would say, second most next to the trail that I showed previously, next to the location that I've been to in the previous photo. So, this has a lot of the same elements, right? And I'm going to talk about them throughout this and break down what I was looking at. So you have interesting light that is hitting this down tree right here, illuminating the moss and kind of dabbling into some of the rest of the midground. You have that depth that's created with this light during blue hour in this moody scene. You have the dark foreground within shadows, the illuminated midground, which is in focus, and then the dark background, which is blurred out. You have a very sort of chaotic scene made simple by using the light and by using color. There are really two dominant colors within this scene: the green that you see and the blue tint of the fog, during blue hour in this sort of old growth hardwood spruce forest. You're going to get a lot of reflections off of the leaves, off of the elements during certain, however the light wants to interact with the scene during certain hours. And then blue hour, you kind of get that blue tint within there. Now, of course, I shot considering how I was going to edit this scene. So there is a little bit of exaggeration within the color, but for the most part, that's how I remember it looking. And the only other color that's really in there is a little bit of yellow right here, but really it's just a different tint of green. You even have some depth and some tension created with the textures. You have to zoom in here to show you kind of this softness of the moss that's growing in here combined with the hardness and the texture of the wood. That is something that I consider also when shooting a lot. What sort of elements are competing with each other within the composition? Again, this is a photo that I personally really enjoy. It to me encapsulates a lot of what I'm looking for, and it creates a photograph that I constantly come back to and constantly reference. So the next photo is of a different season, but in the same trail as the previous photo. Clearly, this is in the winter. Well, honestly, not clearly, because where I live, it will snow like this in the higher elevations of the mountains in October and November pre-winter. But this is in the winter, the same woodland that I showed in the previous picture. And this is one that I really enjoy. This is a more recent photograph that I took, and this is one that I really enjoy, and again has a lot of the same elements that I'm looking for. There is interesting light that is spilling from the top left corner of the composition, going all the way down, creating this sort of almost otherworldly element to the photo, and it brings you down into it to the sort of blue dark shadow at play right here. And those two elements are really creating a lot of tension competing with each other. It's almost meeting directly in the middle of the composition, right? And You also have colors that are complementary of each other and simplifies the scene. You have the warmth, orange glow of the sun coming into, some tension with the blue tone of the shadow, right? Uh, and it really does just create an interesting photograph. You have the hardness of the trees and the softness of the snow, and you have this little bit of a footpath that is guiding you towards the end of the tunnel right here. So, while this doesn't have a per se focal point, just one focal point like the previous two photos, in the first one that I showed, it being the background, and the second one, the previous one to this, the focus being the midground. The focus of this entire photo for it to work is the entirety of the composition. And I really do think that this has all of the elements to create a really great photo. Now, other people, some photographers might go in and clone stamp some of this stuff out, get rid of some of this here, but I really think that just adds even more to the photograph. Clearly there's been a really heavy snowfall this day. Clearly it's absolutely frigid. You would almost expect, in conditions like this, a forest that looks like this to have branches that have fallen onto the scene. I think, for me, in my opinion, going in and clone stamping or removing using the healing brush, or excuse me, generative fill to remove some of these elements kind of takes away from the charm of this photo. Okay, so now to talk about the last photo. This is the most recent that I've shown. The others, the first one is, I think, about 3 years old. The second photo is a little bit older than that. And the photo before this that I showed is from last winter. This one was taken this year, not that long ago, only about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And this might be recency biased, but I really like this photo. This really, really captures a lot of what I'm looking for when I go out shooting. This, again, is a very moody photo taken on a very cloudy, foggy day in the Blue Ridge Mountains where I live. Again, it was raining the previous night, and I knew it would rain this day as well. So I wanted to hit the Blue Ridge Parkway, just cruise along and try to find photos, right? I had an idea of what I was looking for or at least what I would get because of the weather, but I didn't have anything specifically in mind. But when I saw this, I pulled over at an overlook, and this is very far away from where I'm at, but I got in really tight to simplify the scene. And what I'm trying to do here is just create, interesting elements of what I look for. The composition I cut kind of right down the middle to give some dynamic elements between the sky and this forested mountaintop here. I think it creates a lot of tension, a lot of dynamic elements between the top half and the bottom half. You have the blue sort of tinted, cloudy, foggy sky, this really textured, nice green and yellow forest right at the beginning of fall when the leaves are starting to change. That's where you get this yellow in here at. The softness of the sky, the softness of the clouds, of the fog, and, the sort of billowing of the fog that is coming in, sort of enveloping these trees here in sort of the midpoint of this. And then you have that texture of the trees, of the pine, of the leaves here that is competing with that softness. I think it also creates some interesting light to see sort of this yellow poking through some of this fog. And then, the fog sort of shrouding in mystery these trees right here at the top of this mountain, and it coming in, that blue sort of coming into the yellow. I think it does create some interesting light. I think it creates some interesting tension. There's some contrast there. And, with the composition, it being very close, about three colors almost: blue, green, and yellow green, very complementary of each other. I think this has all of the elements that I'm looking for when I'm creating a photo that I think is memorable and that I think is impactful. So the last thing that I want to mention is what I think to be the most important element of a photograph, and that is the story. I think for a viewer to really truly feel connected with an image, there has to be a strong story within that photo. If you look at all of the examples I showed, the running theme is moodiness. That is what I look for when shooting out in landscape, when practicing landscape photography, about a good 90% of the time. I would say I'm always looking for a moody image. Now, there are times that I cannot do that. And if I'm being frank, there are photos that I still enjoy that don't really tell a story. It's just a nice image. For me, the ones that are most impactful have a very strong narrative behind them. All of those images that I showed, they are moody. For lack of a better word, one might call them ethereal. If you want to be really cliche about it, you might say that they are cinematic in nature. Haha, pun intended. But that cinematic quality is done on purpose. The first photo that I showed of that woodland with the light spilling into the background, that was directly inspired by The Green Knight, a brilliant film, one of my favorite movies that David Lowery directed. It is a wonderfully acted movie, really well written, and it is shot absolutely beautifully. If you've seen that movie, there are scenes in which I directly, intentionally lifted the color palette for that first photo. The second photo, again, a very moody cinematic shot. That third photo of the snowy woodland, there was a hint of David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in that photo. Again, one of my favorite movies done by one of my favorite directors. That last photo of the mountainscape, of the clouds rolling in on the mountain treetops, that again, I think is directly inspired by David Fincher for me, and to a lesser extent Denis Villeneuve. Like, I love the movies that those people put out, and I love how they look. So those are the stories that I'm trying to tell. A very moody, ethereal, dark sort of story that, I don't want to say that it's hopeless, because I want there to be hope within the world, but I want them to feel as though they are a bit of a mystery. I want there to be intrigue. I want there to be elements of adventure, elements of the unknown. That's always sort of what I'm looking for in the photos that I create and the stories that I like to tell. What is it? I don't want it to be obvious. Is there safety there, or is there danger over there? I think all of the photos that I showed have great elements of that and tell those stories. So that's what I think is the most important thing. Again, I don't think every photo has to have that. There are very nice images that I like, that I photograph, that really don't have a strong narrative. But for me, again, when I think of the strongest of my works, there's a really good story behind there. And I think that's the most important thing when trying to have a viewer connect with the photograph that you present them. Thanks. Be sure to subscribe if you like this video. I'm going to do more of this I want to do breakdowns. I want to go in depth of the photographs that I create, my design work, all the work that I do. So please be sure to like, thumbs up that video, and subscribe to the channel. Much love. Hope y'all have a good day.